Right now, the world feels frozen in place, like it's waiting for something it can't yet see. Most people scrolling through headlines don't even realize why this moment should terrify them. A ceasefire between the United States, Israel, and Iran has just been announced, buying 2 weeks of silence, and every news anchor is celebrating like the storm has passed. But here's the truth. No one is saying out loud, this isn't peace. This could be the most calculated calm before a disaster we've ever witnessed. If this is opening your eyes, hit subscribe. Many of you already know what's been happening to this channel. And if you want to support, there's a link below. I've spent months digging into what's coming between 2026 and 2030, connecting the dots no one else is talking about. I turned it into an ebook called The Next Global Shift: How to Stay Ahead of Economic Collapse and War, breaking down the economies, the conflicts, and the decisions that could decide everything. If you really want to understand what's unfolding, you have to rewind, because this didn't just start this year. It traces back to the collapse of the 2015 nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, when Donald Trump pulled the United States out in 2018. From that moment on, Washington and Tehran moved like predators circling in the dark, both knowing a collision was inevitable. Negotiations stalled, pressure escalated, and by June 2025, the United States and Israel launched what would later be known as the 12-Day War, sending bombers deep into Iranian nuclear sites before a fragile ceasefire was brokered on June 24th, with mediation involving the United States and Qatar. The world relaxed back then, convincing itself the danger had passed. It was wrong. Everything changed in January 2026. Iranian security forces turned inward, unleashing violence on their own people during the largest wave of protests since the Iranian Revolution, leaving tens of thousands dead in the streets. The response from Donald Trump came almost immediately. The most massive American military buildup in the Middle East since the Iraq War. By mid-February, United States and Iran were back at the table, holding indirect nuclear negotiations through Oman, with officials even hinting at real progress. But behind closed doors, something had already shifted. Donald Trump made it clear he wasn't satisfied. The talks collapsed, not suddenly, but because the outcome had already been decided elsewhere. Then came February 28, 2026. At exactly 6:35 a.m. UTC, United States Central Command announced the unthinkable: a massive wave of airstrikes on Iran, nearly 900 strikes unleashed in just 12 hours. The Americans called it Operation Epic Fury. The Israelis named theirs Roaring Lion. Together, they deployed B-2 Spirit bombers, B-1 Lancer aircraft, B-52 Stratofortress fleets, Tomahawk missile systems, and HIMARS launchers against a nation that had already endured decades of sanctions. Just 9 minutes after the first American strike at 6:45 UTC, Israeli jets launched what they described as decapitation strikes. And in that moment, everything changed. Ali Khamenei, 86 years old in power since 1989, was killed inside his compound, along with members of his family. 40 days of mourning gripped the country, but he wasn't the only one. Iran's defense minister was gone. The commander of the IRGC eliminated. The secretary of the Defense Council wiped out. 4 senior intelligence officials erased in a single wave. The Israel Defense Forces confirmed the deaths of 7 top Iranian security figures before the world even fully understood what had happened. Then came the moment that shattered any remaining illusion of control. In southern Iran, near Bandar Abbas, a girls' school was struck, killing around 170 people. The explanation from the United States and Israel claimed it was collateral damage, a misfired defense system near a military base. Iran called it something else entirely: intentional. By nightfall, the Iranian Red Crescent reported 201 dead and 747 injured across 24 provinces. And by then, retaliation was already underway. Drones and ballistic missiles surged toward Israel, and American positions across Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. One drone even struck a British installation in Akrotiri, while missiles were intercepted over Turkey. 3 American service members were killed that day. the first U.S. casualties, and in that instant, the conflict crossed a line it could never return from. But what most people watching from afar completely missed was the real trigger point. The Strait of Hormuz, just 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest, yet responsible for nearly 20% of the world's oil flow every single day. And then, without hesitation, Iran shut it down. The numbers that followed didn't just tell a story, they sounded an alarm. On February 26th, just 48 hours before everything ignited, the 888 reported the national average price of regular gas sitting at $2.98. It looked stable, predictable, safe. But by April 2026, that same number had shattered past $4 per gallon for the first time since August 2022. A violent surge of nearly 39% in barely 5 weeks, as crude oil rocketed beyond $100 a barrel. The warning signs weren't subtle. Japan's prime minister went public, admitting that if the Strait of Hormuz stayed closed, his country's oil reserves would collapse within 8 to 9 months, dragging the entire Japanese economy down with it. India depends on that region for 60% of its oil. China, 40%. This was never just a Middle East crisis. It was already inside your life, in your fuel, your food, your bills, and whether you've ever studied the Persian Gulf or not, the real turning point wasn't the missiles. It was the man who came after Ali Khamenei. Iran's Assembly of Experts chose his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, 56 years old, as the new supreme leader, a decision Donald Trump rejected almost instantly as unacceptable. But analysts focused on something far more dangerous. Mojtaba wasn't a compromise figure. He was deeply tied to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and his reputation was clear: more aggressive, more uncompromising, and far more hostile toward the United States than his father ever was. His first declaration made that reality undeniable. The Strait of Hormuz would remain shut. This wasn't a weakened Iran rising from chaos. This was a hardened one, sharpened by war. By early April, the scale of destruction had turned into numbers that were impossible to ignore. According to the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, Iran had unleashed over 5,000 drones, more than 2,000 ballistic missiles, and at least 50 cruise missiles. Qatar, one of the world's most critical natural gas suppliers, announced it could take years to recover after its energy infrastructure was torn apart by Iranian strikes. Across the Gulf, nations that had spent decades building images of wealth, stability, and security watched those reputations unravel in real time. Then came April 7, 2026, the moment everything teetered on the edge. Donald Trump posted on Truth Social just before his 8 p.m. Eastern deadline, writing words that felt less like a statement and more like a warning carved in stone. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. The backlash was immediate. Congressional Democrats called it dangerously close to a war crime. Meanwhile, Pope Leo XIV, the first American pope, stood in St. Peter's Square and pleaded for peace, condemning the destruction of civilian infrastructure as a symbol of how far humanity had fallen. And then, just 2 hours before that deadline expired, something unexpected happened. Pakistan stepped in. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif quietly positioned his government as the bridge between Washington and Tehran. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi publicly thanked him. Behind the curtain, China delivered the final pressure that pushed Iran to accept. The ceasefire was announced. Fragile, sudden, almost unbelievable. Donald Trump described it as a double-sided ceasefire, claiming that military objectives had already been exceeded and that a long-term peace agreement was within reach. Iran's Supreme National Security Council echoed the claim, declaring victory even as the deal was signed. The markets reacted instantly. Brent crude plunged more than 13%, settling near 94.74s. The Dow Jones Industrial Average surged whopping 300 points, its strongest single-day performance since April 2025. It looked like relief. It felt like the crisis was ending, but that sense of calm didn't last. The ceasefire began breaking apart almost immediately. Lebanon became the fault line. Within hours, Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed that Israel would pause strikes on Iran for 2 weeks, and then delivered the line that changed everything. The ceasefire did not apply to Lebanon. That same day, Israel launched Operation Eternal Darkness against Hezbollah, its most aggressive strike yet, killing 254 people and injuring over 2,600, with 92 deaths concentrated in Beirut alone. By April 8th, another 182 people were dead in central Beirut from strikes that landed after the ceasefire was supposedly active. Iran's response came fast and direct. If the assault on Lebanon continued, Israel would be targeted. Reports from Iranian media revealed something even more dangerous. The reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, the very foundation of the ceasefire, had been halted because of the Lebanese attacks. Shehbaz Sharif, the architect of the deal, publicly condemned the violations, urging all sides to hold the line for just 2 weeks so diplomacy could survive. But Iran's Supreme National Security Council delivered a statement that sounded less like diplomacy and more like a loaded weapon. Their hands were on the trigger, and the smallest mistake would be met with overwhelming force. And beneath all of it, deeper than the missiles, deeper than the politics, one question refused to go away. Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium was still inside the country, likely buried within the very enrichment facilities targeted during the previous June strikes, untouched, unresolved, and waiting. Donald Trump claimed that the United States would coordinate with Iran to locate, extract, and remove the enriched uranium buried beneath the rubble. A statement that sounded decisive but was met with silence from Tehran. No confirmation, no agreement, just uncertainty. At the same time, Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu doubled down, demanding the complete dismantling of Iran's nuclear program. But Iran's response came through its 10-point peace proposal, a document that rejected that demand entirely, without hesitation. And just like that, the very issue that ignited this entire conflict, the justification behind nearly 900 strikes launched in a single morning, remained unresolved, untouched, and dangerously alive. None of that hesitation showed up in the Pentagon's next move. Their budget request surged forward with more than $200 billion in additional war funding. A number that doesn't whisper caution, it screams preparation. Preparation not for peace, but for something longer, deeper, and far more permanent. Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, told the Senate that Iran's conventional military strength had been largely dismantled. But then came the line that should have dominated every headline, and didn't. The regime itself remains intact. And while governments calculate strategy, it's ordinary people who absorb the impact. In Lebanon alone, more than 600 lives have been lost, and over 1 million people have been forced from their homes, more than 1/6 of the entire population, erased from normal life in a matter of days. The warning from the International Monetary Fund cut even deeper. For every 10% rise in energy prices throughout 2026, global inflation is expected to climb by nearly 0.5%. That means the consequences don't stay on the battlefield. They follow you home, into your daily life, into every bill you pay. 2 weeks. That's all this ceasefire has created. A narrow, fragile window where two sides, both claiming absolute victory, are expected to negotiate something lasting. But look closer. A new Iranian supreme leader, more aggressive than the last. Lebanon still burning despite the agreement. The Strait of Hormuz hanging in uncertainty, its reopening anything but guaranteed. And quietly, in the background, a $200 billion military funding request, signaling that somewhere inside Washington, the next phase may already be mapped out. Antonio Guterres urged both sides to respect the ceasefire, expressing hope that it might hold, that it might even extend. The world is watching, waiting, hoping. But the real question was never whether this ceasefire would survive. The real question is far more unsettling. What happens when it doesn't? That's where we are right now. If you want the full breakdown, the ebook is in the description. I'll see you in the next one.